Hello there, and welcome to this video where I'm going to talk you through all the factions that have been announced, give you a few clues as to what you might want to go for, sort of design choices, how the armies play on the tabletop, that kind of stuff. There are also a couple of new factions that Games Workshop have announced for the old world, and we'll talk through the legacy factions as well. So get strapped in. Oh, I just clicked on the wrong one. It started well. So the first I want to talk about dwarves. Dwarves are cool. I really like the dwarves. Dwarves represent like really super reliable troops. They don't run away very often. Their cannons don't misfire very often. They don't really have magic. They don't really like magic, but they do have runic stuff, which is basically magic, but it's not according to them because their moral sort of military code is that they've got to not use magic, but they're allowed to use runes, which is fine. They hold grudges. They're pretty grumpy, so they don't move very fast or very far. However, they do have gyrocopters, so they can exert power over the battlefield with gyrocopters and with cannons. They're a proper castle-y sort of faction. So if you like castling up in a bit of the battlefield and then shooting the ever-living bejesus out of your foes, then dwarves are definitely for you. They are also smaller, so you might think they're easier to paint, but they ain't. Next we have the Empire, which are cannons. The thing I love about the Empire is they kind of represent that kind of mid-18th century black powder taking over military sort of thing. They've got some super heavy cavalry in the form of inner circle knights, which have full plate and a 2-up save, so they can be really durable. They're pretty much like humans in any other kind of fantasy factional thing. They're very balanced. They can do pretty much anything. They just don't do one particular thing very well. They do everything quite well. So they're an interesting faction. So if you like that kind of Teutonic Knight sort of thing, or you like that kind of just nuts firing rockets at the enemy sort of aesthetic, then this is definitely the one for you. Going back a few centuries, you've got Britannia, who represent that kind of knightly, peasantly. They're very hierarchical in terms of, there are knights, there are peasants, and even the knights have hierarchies within the knights. So certain knights don't mix with the knights because they're not quite worthy to mix with those knights. That's the Bretonnian way. They've got this. I've shown you this paladin because this is a new sculpt for Warhammer. I think it's brilliant. Like it really suits the old world aesthetic, but using modern sculpting techniques to create a really nice model. But even so, like the old peasants that you see here, those models are pretty good. Stakes are great. Everything works like you'd expect it to. It's like and with the new sub factions, they're pretty flexible. You can go all knights, you can go all peasants, you can do what you like. They're pretty good. If you like that kind of, if you like painting heraldry, however, these are definitely the guys for you. Next to the Bretonnians are the Wood Elves, who live in the woodland realms. They are tricksy, they're all over the place, they are shooting you constantly. Sometimes they take animated trees to come and help slaughter you, so they're really super effective at range, and they're quite difficult to get into combat unless it's on their terms. So if you like sort of outside the box thinking when you're playing on the tabletop, Wood Elves are definitely for you. They're flexible enough to achieve that. And I really hope they bring back Orion in some form, because that model's great. It'd be nice to have a resculpt, because the staff is a bit difficult to attach. That was a metal model, so the staff attaching, there's actually a really small contact point between the staff and the arm, which made it quite difficult. But I really like, I've put this Skaith's Wild Hunt model. This is an AOS thing. I really hope they do some new models in this vein. Some kind of centaur elves would be super cool. They're not really mentioned in the lore of the old world, so if they did that, there would be some whinging. However, still brilliant. Everything can be retconned, right? As long as the models are cool enough, you can get away with it. Anyway, high elves are a bit like the wood elves. They're quite fragile, but I say they're quite fragile. They're not when they're on a dragon. Dragons are not fragile. However, high elves represent martial prowess. They're very good at everything they do. They're also quite rare, so consequently they're quite expensive. Armies aren't particularly big, and they've got to make everything count. So there's this real, even when you're playing them, there's this real desperation to make sure that everything that you have works, and works really well. Because if it doesn't, if you're wasteful with them, you will throw them away and you will lose battles. So they're actually they are simultaneously the most powerful and the weakest faction at the same time. You've got to know what you're doing, and if you do know what you're doing, and if you can control yourself and look after your units, they will provide you with victory after victory. However, if you're slightly careless, I wouldn't go high elves. However, if you are slightly careless, this is definitely the faction for you. Orcs and goblins give you huge armies on the battlefield. They're really cheap. They do combat really well, not really other stuff. They do massed horde. They're the massed horde style army for Warhammer. They're, you know, if you love charging into combat with reckless abandon, shouting "Wah!" at the top of your lungs, these guys are definitely for you. This is the old Wyvern, which was on a sort of it was on a release that Games Workshop did, where they're made to order. That's what they call it. This is the old sort of metal Wyvern. That suggests that we might be getting a new Wyvern sculpt. That would be pretty cool. I'd love to see what they do with the Wyvern, actually. I'd like to see them like resculpt some of the bigger monsters. That would be fantastic. Yeah, orcs. I love orcs. I think they're just brilliant. But they're not the faction to be careful with, right? They're not, you know, they're brutal but cunning, and the goblins are cunning but brutal. But like, you know, brutal is there. They're definitely good at that. Going a step further on the brutality scale, not so much on the cunning, are the Warriors of Chaos. These are like my favourite faction. They have these Shaggoth creatures that are just massive centaur, bull. I don't know how to describe them really. They're amazing. They're sort of cast that lightning's coming out of the wazoo with them, and lightning somehow heals them. And there's little versions of Dragon Ogres as well. They're called Dragon Ogres, but whatever. The Warriors of Chaos are just big, burly, spiky. They're really good in combat, really tough, really strong, do a lot of damage. But they're quite rare. They also have the Marauder Hordes as well to back them up. So these are mortals that are a bit less brutal, but still pretty brutal. Who are lightly armoured and cheap, so they essentially throw the marauders at the enemy, and you know, ranks of warhounds as screens, so that these big burly buggers can close the distance and get in. I'd love to see this is an old sculpt for Dekala, the Denied One, I think she was called. I love the lore and the narrative and all the rest, and I was so looking forward to the model coming out, and then that came out, and then I was like, I theory crafted armies around her, and then that model came out, and I was like, I'll not bother then. So I'd love it if they resculpt some of the older heroes. I'm not even sure Dekala's actually born at this point in the old world, but new cool heroes for Chaos, please. The old Warriors models I think are still perfectly serviceable, so you can do them. The new ones from AOS are pretty good. I'm not sure whether they're good for ranking up, and the new Warriors of Slaves to Darkness Chaos Warriors are very they're very Age of Sigmar-y. I don't know how else to describe it. They just don't feel like they fit in the old world, whereas these models, this kind of serried ranks, this wall of steel implacably marching towards you, feels very kind of foreboding, and somehow more intimidating than the new ones for some reason, but maybe that's just me being nostalgic. In a similar vein to Chaos Warriors are the Beastmen. So essentially the Chaos Warriors are all in the frozen north. They're kind of like, winter is coming sort of stuff, really hard as nails. Actually, throughout the world, the most common manifestation of the powers of chaos are the Beastmen, who are essentially mutated animals or people or elves, or nobody's really sure. Construct the narrative around where your beast herd came from as you wish. They had some really cool characters, such as this guy here, Kazarak the One Eye. He was great. He was one of my favourites. They had Gorth. I mean, obviously none of them are alive yet, but in the current old world setting. But yeah, bringing back some cool Beastman characters would be great. They have Minotaurs, they have giants, they have Dragon Ogres, they have Jabberslythes and more weird creatures as well. But fundamentally, they represent hordes and hordes and hordes of beasts attacking you from all directions, such that loads of their army has the ambushes special rule, which means units come on from the sides and from the back later on in the battle and sporadically. So what you see on the tabletop at the beginning of the game is not what you're going to be facing over all of it. They're going to outmaneuver you, and you're going to have to face off against them coming at you from all directions. Similarly, if you're a Beastman player, you have that advantage over your opponent in that you can attack them where and whenever and wherever suits you best. You don't have to wait for your opponent to come to you. You go out there and get them, and you're able to more or less attack from any direction. So they're really, really super flexible, but it's easy to get that kind of ambusher tactic wrong. Then we have the Tomb Kings of Khemri. That's a Warhammer Total War Queen Khalida, who's my favourite. I'm currently building an army around her. Look at the narrative for Queen Khalida, she's fantastic. Cetra's a very, very popular character, and he's returned in the books. Khalida has not. But Cetra is like the main king of the Tomb Kings, or so he thinks. He's not actually at this stage. It's very much contested. However, he thinks he's the king of the Tomb Kings. And this is the guy, Nagash, who's the reason for the Tomb Kings existing. Thankfully, he's not in this edition, and this has been voted the worst model that Warhammer has ever produced by, I think, quite some. I can't remember where that poll was, but I remember a poll being done a few years ago, and this was like at the bottom of the pile in terms of it's a very contentious model is what I'll just say. I mean, I feel really sorry for the person who sculpted it. Again, this is a metal, like the skull, it's just all of it's way too big. Anyway, and this staff, right, this is a metal staff, right? The contact point is actually a tiny little ball in the wrist, so it's just, I remember putting that together myself once, and I think I sold it after trying to glue the damn thing together, because I thought, I'm not painting this. Anyway, so that's Tomb Kings. Tomb Kings are cool. Oh, how do Tomb Kings play? Tomb Kings are like, they're very fast. They've got really good, surprisingly good shooting. They're undead, so they take ages to kill. They've got several interesting and unique mechanics that make them quite a challenge strategically. They're kind of a bit like humans in that they're balanced between being able to do everything quite well but nothing really, really well. I suppose the main unique thing about them is masses of chariots. If you want to go down that route, you can have masses of chariots, but you don't have to. That's just an option. Anyway, Cathay. So we're on to the two factions that have been announced, and we haven't seen any models or casts or anything for yet. So this is all from this picture in the top right is from Warhammer Community about the old world. So they published a little map of where the Cathayans are in the old world, and did a bit about the three sub factions that they were talking about. So Cathay, I'm given to understand that the model designers have been working with the game designers for Warhammer Total War 3, so we can hopefully expect to see this statue dude, because in the game he's amazing, and some a new take on dragons. This kind of very oriental looking dragon. Interesting cavalry designs. Like, I'd love to see how they play on the tabletop, and I hope they're just not a sort of slightly different version of the Empire. I hope they have like a really interesting mechanic that makes them work differently. And given from how they've written the rules for everything else, I'm pretty confident GW can pull it off. But I don't know what it'll look like, but I'm sure the models will look pretty much like all this, you know. The next faction that's been announced, but we haven't really seen much for yet, is Kislev. So you got the Ice Queen, and that's the old model for Boris, who was the. I mean, obviously, again, he's not born yet. That's the Ice Queen Tsarina. I've forgotten her bloody name now. That was terrible of me, isn't it? But anyway, so she's obviously not born yet. So we don't know what they're going to look like in the old world. But what you can expect is some kind of Eastern Orthodox style, sort of Mongolian, sort of Russian. They're combining quite a few different aesthetics. So you're going to have cavalry on bears, you're going to have really fast steppe cavalry, you're going to have some pretty tough line troops, and a bit of artillery, but not a lot. So they'll play on the tabletop quite similarly to Chaos Warriors, but with a slightly different mechanic, being slightly more lightly armoured and slightly more manoeuvrable. Again, I really hope they give them a really interesting dynamic that makes them play differently to Marauders, because they're kind of the mirror of them, but the good guy mirror of them, if that makes sense. So it'll be really interesting to see how they write the rules for these on a tabletop. But you know, the old models were great, and they're probably still perfectly serviceable. So a bit of bear cav would be nice, because they're just awesome. I like bears. Anyway, so the non-supported factions now, we've got Dark Elves. Dark Elves are a bit like High Elves in that they are elite, they're rare, they're quite fragile. However, they do have some stuff that makes them a bit more. They are slightly more durable than our High Elves, so their super heavy cavalry is not the Dragon Princes. Dragon Princes are High Elves. Dark Elves have a super heavy cavalry, cold ones. So they're a bit tougher. They've got a similar sort of armor, but they're a bit tougher and a bit more ferocious in combat. Dark Elves also have access to, rather than loads and loads of dragons, I mean, they do have a dragon, arguably the best dragon in the game. They also have access to stuff like Hydras and Charybdis, which are like big sort of ground monsters that do loads and loads of attacks and, you know, take out entire units all on their own. They've also got the Blackguard, which are one of the best units in the game, in my opinion. So they've got a lot going for them. They're pretty strong with magic. They're quite balanced. They've got a lot of shooting. They've got a lot of combat potential. So I mean, Dark Elves work pretty much as you'd expect. They are just like the evil mirror of High Elves. The other thing that they do have a lot of are Witch Elves, which are like lady elves that are barely wearing anything, and Witch Elves are ferocious but have no armor, so they're quite cheap and do a lot of damage if you get them into combat, but they'd likely get shot down beforehand. So Witch Elves are an interesting additional dynamic behind the Dark Elves, but Dark Elves are pretty cool. They're one of my favourite factions, and they're ruled by this guy called Malekith down here, who's he's not called Malekith anymore, is he? He's called Malarian now. They've renamed him because I think in one of the Marvel films they nicked the name Malekith for their King of the Dark Elves, basically because Warhammer, the IP, had nicked Malekith from Norse. You know that Malekith is the king of the of the Dark Elves in Norse mythology. So they've renamed him Malarian. He's now the king of the Dark Elves. Vampire Counts. These are one of the most popular factions in Warhammer. Like, everybody loves the Vampire Counts. They are so cool. So do I. I mean, I'm currently trying to figure out how I'm going to play with my Soul Blight without having to rebase them all. I think I probably am going to have to, maybe with the monsters, the larger models. Maybe I can get away with it with mainly because my Soul Blight, I've spent ages doing like a really cool basing scheme, and it took me a long time to sculpt all those bases, so I really don't want to have to rebase them all. But anyway, so you got vampire counts are about vampires and associated undead stuff. So they got dragons, they got some black knights, they got vampire cavalry, blood knights they're called. Blood knights are arguably the best cavalry in the game. They're pretty good. The blood knights are slightly better than chosen knights, and also they come back. You can resurrect them because they're undead. So vampire counts are, I think, incredibly strong, incredibly powerful. However, if you manage to kill the general, all of it just crumbles. Like, vampire count player starts to lose models all the time. So the vampire count player has a real difficulty in that. So if you compare them with Khemri, who have the same dynamic, Khemri have a general who's like, a big combat lord thing who can dish out a lot of damage. But if the general sort of character dies, it doesn't really make any difference. With the Tomb Kings, it's the Hierophant. So the Hierophant can be like a high-level wizard that's essentially behind the general, looking after the forces. With vampire counts, not really. It's your highest level wizard that becomes your general. So that's like the same thing. So how you design your list, you've got to be really mindful about the fact that you really don't want your super heavy like combat lord to be in the front of the enemy. So you got to work out what's going to be fighting the enemy whilst your combat lord is deciding what combat to get involved with, because if he dies, you know it's not good. In fact, you'll probably lose if your general dies. So they're a really interesting army to play with. They're a really interesting army to play against, and I'd encourage everybody to get I know they're not a supported faction, but I'd encourage people to get a Vampire Counts army just anyway, because it represents a really interesting tactical challenge that you're not going to find anywhere else. They're really, really good. If you love vampires, get Vampire Counts, but B, if you like a really interesting tactical challenge, then Vampire Counts are pretty high up there. Chaos Dwarves. Chaos Dwarves are the king of ranged stuff. They have this thing up here in the top right is called an Iron Demon. The Iron Demon is like a big sort of land Thomas the Tank Engine train sort of thing that, whilst having some pretty powerful guns itself, can carry around all the other war machines of the Chaos Dwarves behind it. So you have this mobile fortress of gun-toting madness that can rain down fire, hell and demonic ichor on your enemy as the battle progresses. So Chaos Dwarves are just a wonderful faction for, they have blunderbusses, they have these weird flame dwarf creation things called Kadai, which are just awesome. You can have a Chaos Dwarf Lord on I think that's a Taurox, a great Taurox. There's also another one called a Lammasu. They've all got these epic names and scimitars, and the other thing as well is Chaos Dwarves love magic, so their general's not only a really powerful combat demon, he's also a level 4 spellcaster who can also stop your war machines from overheating and blowing themselves up. Like, the general's great and the characters are great, and they've also got like Chaos Dwarves are great. Like, they're wonderful. So if you like the idea of dwarves being this dour sort of grumpy fighty mess, but you also like the idea of blowing the heck up out of everything all at once everywhere, then Chaos Dwarves are definitely the faction for you. However, do be aware that most of this was under the old Forge World brand and therefore very pricey. So Chaos Dwarves are not the faction to go for on a budget, but they are cool AF. And to be fair to Games Workshop, they've shown that it's not pay to win, because Chaos Dwarves would be the best if it was pay to win. They are cool AF, but they do have significant weaknesses that a clever opponent can exploit. So it's not like they've been written to be brilliant. There's a battle report that somebody's done recently with Chaos Dwarves, and it just shows that you know, they do have difficulties. Demons. Diamonds. So the demons essentially come in the 4 god lists. So you've got Tzeentch, Nurgle, Slaanesh, Khorne, no particular order. I do not have a favourite. I am Chaos Undivided. So Tzeentch is all about casting spells. You look at the demon list and go and have a look at my breakdown of demons, because I get so super excited about this faction. Like, brilliant. So you've got the Tzeentch, where more or less everything is a wizard or is like a pretend bound spell. So magic is just everywhere. It's brilliant, and it's not overpowered either. It's just all little interesting spells that add a bit to the army. Nurgle has like loads of ward saves and regen saves, and everything takes ages to kill. And you know, it doesn't dish out that much damage. It just gradually wears down the opponent. They get lots of weird little attacks in that you're not expecting, so indirect attacks. Again, it's so well written, it feels like you're fighting a disease, which is what it's supposed to feel like. Slaanesh are lithe and quick, and they're excessive, right? They are very excessive. So demonettes have a stupid amount of attacks. The Keeper of Secrets, you know, can buff itself up to being like near godly, like the Keeper of Secrets with like all of the buff spells that it can have, and it's just absolutely horrendous. However, Slaanesh demons are pretty much the definition of glass cannon. Like, they go into you, they destroy you, and then you breathe on them and they all die. So they are super excessive at both, you know, having no survivability, but also having just loads of output. So Slaanesh demons are great. And then Khorne is all about like just engaging with the foe and smashing face, and they're super good at that. They've got a really high amount of damage output, probably not as much as Slaanesh, but they've got a reasonably high amount of damage output. There's a lot of stuff with cleaving blow, which is basically they try and take your head off. Skulls for the Skull God. They are collecting those skulls. They are coming your way, and they're going to get them. So the other really cool thing about demons is that you can take like an amalgamation of different factions. So you could have like a Bloodthirster, and then a few units of Nurgle, then a bit of Slaanesh, and then a bit of Tzeentch. The army restriction is that whatever the greater demon is, essentially your core units are made up of that demon's gods. So if you took a Bloodthirster, you'd need a load of blood letters, but then the other 1,000 points ish you could spend on other stuff. So demons are cool. I love what they've done with them, and the fact that there are 4 factions in one, it's a really good book to look at in terms of like game design. It's a window into the soul of the games developers, and it's wonderful. Then we've got Lizardmen. I've put this map here because this is the starting map positions for the Lizardmen on the new Total War 3 campaign. It just gives you a bit of an idea about, you know, they are here. They are like, this is the old world. The Lizardmen are here. I'm just a bit confused as to why they're like a legacy faction, to be honest. But Lizardmen are, you know, as you'd expect, they are lizardy men. They have really strong magic in the form of Slann. That's if you want to go down a Slann route. They have another sort of sub-breed called Saurus, which are like the big tough warriors. And then they have another sub-breed which are... Oh no, they're Saurus again. Then they have another sub-breed. I haven't actually got any skinks. You can tell I prefer Saurus, can't you? Then they have another sub-breed called Skinks, which are like little and nimble and kind of nip around and shoot poison and stuff. So, and then also they've got the big dinosaurs like Carnosaurs. And so if you're a fan of dinosaurs, Lizardmen tick every single box you could ever possibly imagine. You can have Velociraptors and T-Rexes and Ankylosaurus and Stegodons and weird frog things that didn't really exist, but and loads and loads of cool dino related stuff. They're all covered in gold, and well, I don't know what else to say about Lizardmen really. How do they play on the table? It really depends on. They're very flexible. It depends on what you take. So if you take a Bastillodon / Saurus list, which are Bastillodons are the Ankylosaurus. So if you take that kind of list, then it's going to be slow. It's not going to die very quickly. It's going to take ages to get over to your opponent, and then it's just going to gradually chew through it, right? But if you take like loads and loads of skinks and maybe some Croxigor, then you're going to Croxigor. Oh, this is one that I've not quite finished assembling yet. But Croxigor are like big, like ogre lizard things. Yeah, so if you take a sort of skink list, then they're going to be nipping around all the time, getting in the way of everybody, shooting loads of poisoned attacks, being surprisingly good in everything, but also terrible at everything as well. I don't know how to describe lizardmen, really. They're a bit of a... It really depends on how you play them, really. You can build an army within lizardmen to your playstyle. The one thing that they do have that's quite unique about lizardmen is that they've all got pretty low initiative, so they are cold-blooded, which means that they do stick around. They're surprisingly resilient to panic and stuff, but they will more or less always be striking last in combat, apart from against the undead, of course. But yeah, so that's lizardmen. Lizardmen are pretty cool. Ogre kingdoms. Next, ogre kingdoms are big burly blokes that will charge at the enemy, not very heavily armoured, and they just do big stuff. Everything's about being big. So this is a great cannon on top of a rhino, which is pulling a chariot. Like, how the hell that little thing is carrying all that, I haven't got a clue. But anyway, I say that little thing, it's probably twice the size of me. However, compared with the great cannon, it's not very big. Yeah, they're all about just eating, really. They like eating. They eat all the time. That's how they get so big and large. And as a chap who does strongman, I can tell you the way that you get big and large is you eat lots of food. So they're constantly eating, constantly hungry, constantly on the move, constantly trying to find something to eat. They ride these like big... I've got an army of them and I've forgotten the name of these things. I've got 8 of them. They carry around cannons instead of handguns. They carry handguns instead of pistols. They ride massive creatures as well. Their play style is basically they do impact hits. So you get the charge off, you're going to do a load of impact hits. Then maybe your opponent gets to swing before you because your initiative isn't great, but it doesn't matter because you've got loads of wounds, so not a lot dies, and then you smash them into the pulp and start, stripping the flesh off their bones. So that's kind of how they work. They get their impact hits, they get a lot of stompy sort of attacks as well, so they get a lot of attacks in that aren't like direct damage. They are relatively simple to take down. Like, you just need to concentrate on bringing these bad boys down. So yeah, ogres play. I just look at it. It does that just on the table. I mean, they don't really need that much explanation. Sadly, Greasus Goldtooth isn't alive yet. Greasus Goldtooth was like a character from the old world who was like this really fat guy on this like throne of gold that was carried around by like 3 million Noblars. Oh, Noblars! I'd forgotten about Noblars. Yeah, their kind of slaves are this like servant creature called a Noblar, which is like even more puny than a goblin. And so there's little Noblars running around doing weird stuff all the time everywhere as well. And they do some pretty weird and nasty stuff. So yeah, I mean, this is Ogre Kingdoms. It does that pretty much. And finally, last but by no means least, what has absolutely got to be my favourite faction from the old world. This is one I played for years and years and years. I won tournaments with them. Like, I love the Skaven. I really need to buy a new army now. I've been writing lists with them and I just can't work out what I want to take, really. It's very frustrating. Anyway, so I've got a few mod things that I wanted to show you. So how do they play on the tabletop? They've got... well, again, they're so flexible. There's like sub-clans to the Skaven. So you've got like the Warlord style clan. So this is Queek Headtaker. Again, he's not in the game this time round because he's born many centuries in the future. But I'm sure they'll have something a bit like him. But, this is... Queek had a trophy rack that had loads of trophies on it that used to speak to him, and he used to argue with himself. The thing about Skaven is that they're very funny. They're all absolutely nuts, sort of in a nice way, but really not. everything about them is just insane. It's just chittering hordes of madness. So you've got hordes and hordes of rats that, you know, are there 1 minute and then they're broken the next. Like, they're incredibly brave when they're in numbers, but as soon as they start to get burnt down, they just flake away and disappear. They have mad, insane. This is actually a custom job on a what looks to be like a giant, and somebody sculpted. So the thing is, you can go absolutely nuts with your sculpting and your modelling, and you know, you can do. They're just so versatile for that. It's just, again, it's about madness and just the madness of the chittering hordes. You know, this is a new assassin from like an AOS warband. I mean, I'd love to see these sorts of figures in with the Skaven this time around. This kind of like drooping, wet kind of look, sewers. I love the Skaven. They've also got like some amazing war machines, like rattling guns, and you know, all sorts. Really, they're just absolutely love the Skaven. They are, they're just brilliant. Just the madness of yes. Yeah, I don't know what else to say. How do they play? I mean, I played Clan Scryer, so mine was like. All about managing probabilities. In fact, I think that is just Skaven. It's all about managing probabilities. Like, everything's going to kill itself at some point throughout, certainly throughout a weekend. Everything will kill itself. But like, you know, you've just got to manage the probabilities. Like, they're not. There's a chance every time that they will be amazing and destroy the thing that you put it into, but then there's a chance they will do absolutely nothing and in fact actively sabotage themselves and, you know, whatever. So they're super unreliable, but they have a lot of output if you can handle the unreliability of them and work with the unreliability of them. And that's it. That's a wrap. That's all the factions that they've announced. We've gone through the legacy ones after Kislev and Cathay. Cathay and Kislev, they've said they're going to do. So, you know, wait and see. I think my prediction is that over the next year we don't see the new factions. We see them start to like consolidate and get all the supply chains sorted for the old factions. So I think it's going to take a few months. So GW, if you're not aware, have I don't know how far they are along with making the new factory in Nottingham, but essentially they've decided they wouldn't need a new factory. The new factory, from what I've been told, is going to essentially focus on 40k, maybe do a bit of Age of Sigmar. So the old factory will be rededicated back to doing like legacy games, Forge World, Old World, Horus Heresy, all that kind of stuff. So I think that over the next year, whilst they get all that, you know, because, you know, I've run nothing as complicated as Games Workshop, but, you know, I've been responsible for some quite big projects in the past, and like opening a new factory is a logistical nightmare. Like, you know, hats off to them for even getting the one done. Like, opening a brand new factory just down the road is, you know, it's quite a feat they've managed to get it so close. Normally finding a factory, you know, is quite difficult. So yeah, it'll be really interesting. So I think over the next year you're going to start to see more 40k production move over to this new factory. They're going to have to move a lot of plants, a lot of machinery over there. So I think what we're going to see is, you know, they're going to focus on getting the old sculpts out of the stock room and retooling everything. So what that means is casting models, seeing which molds still work and which ones don't, which need updating, which need recasting. So basically they cast the sculpts and put them back through the casting process, through the sculpting process, using the stuff that they've got. They have some super talented sculptors still working there, who, you know, can go back to doing the old, you know, using green stuff and bits of grey stuff and plastic and what have you. So and it's really interesting. I find it really interesting that they're bringing back like actual metal models and actual metal mold making. I think that's wonderful, because the metal models are pretty cool. They're a nightmare, but they are cool. They just feel like something more substantial, and the prices I don't think are that bad. They're about what they used to be in 8th. So you know, they're not terrible. 3 Grail Knights for, what is it, 36 quid, so they're like 12 quid each. I mean, I know that sounds like a lot, but actually that's more or less what they were. And actually 1 Grail Knight for 12 quid seems a lot cheaper than a small plastic hero for 20. So that doesn't sound terrible. So I'm really hopeful. Orcs and Goblins are next. They're the one that's going to be released next, so we'll see. But anyway, I really hope this video has been useful and it's helped you decide, like, if you've had any doubts, what you're going to go for next. I'd suggest, however, that you can't really rely on supply lines coming around anytime soon. So if you're watching this video wanting to make a decision now, go and have a look what's available through Age of Sigmar. There's a lot of Skaven available, so you could do a Skaven list. In terms of the other old world factions, like Khemri, supply chains are a bit sporadic. It's just really difficult to actually buy stuff for the old world at the moment. But I'm super hyped about the whole thing. Really excited about it. Really want to get some more games in. But anyway, thanks for listening. Like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff, and I'll catch you around soon. Toodaloo.